Welcome to a new episode of Wind Waker Unflooded, a 3D modeling fan art project where I am reimagining the Kingdom of Hyrule within the world of the Wind Waker. Y'all, thank you so much for watching. As always, look at the progress of the world. I've decided to add trees to this render. Every now and then when I do these intros, I render them with or without trees, just kind of depending on I mean, it does make the render take a little longer, but it is worth kind of showing, because I think often I show the world just kind of with the bare model, and it's worth showing that, like, no, there will be more on it, and like a final render would have trees, vegetation, grass, like all these little things, different types of trees. And there's a type of tree that would grow in kind of central Hyrule, there's a type of tree that would grow in the Lost Woods, and those things are different. And I think it's just kind of worth showing off the progress of the world with all of that in mind. So I just wanted to kind of point that out, because I don't do that every time, first of all. But today we have an exciting video. This is the culmination of a lot of recommendations. So everyone, shout out to, let me see if I can find the usernames before I say this. But we are doing a, I'm calling it the Tower of Winds. It is loosely inspired by the Tower of Winds from Four Swords Adventures. So thank you so much to everyone that's suggested this map. I've had a couple of suggestions, a couple of repeated suggestions, and I thank you, and I want you to hear that your voice is heard, that your suggestions, they make it to my ear. And so here we are, and and I've made some decisions here. It doesn't look exactly like the Tower of Winds from Four Swords Adventures. It's its own thing, and maybe even a different location, but there are parts of it that are inspired by that. But it's also like I made some decisions aesthetically and in location to connect it more to Wind Waker's Wind Temple itself, and I think that that's also interesting. And I think part of what's interesting about this project, and I think I've gotten some comments kind of about this as well, and some of them I didn't exactly understand what y'all were saying, so I guess, correct me if I'm wrong, but I've gotten comments before that are like, I wish this project was more Wind Waker Unflooded and less Hyrule, and to me it's like, well, that's the same thing, but I guess correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like what that means is you want to see more of showing these locations that we see on these islands, and more of the project you want to extrapolate from those, and less of just populating what's under them. And the project requires both, but I do think adding on to the Wind Temple and showing its exterior, I think that is, a powerful way of, showing the first one, showing, all right, let's extrapolate from the islands of the Great Sea and show you more of those islands. That is an aspect of the project that is important. As important as figuring out figuring out new things to add below the surface, and drawing from other games in order to create that detail. Those are all aspects of the project. I think I've talked before about different philosophies that I have while 3D modeling. And on any given day, I may be recreating a location from another game, building something from scratch, filling in the gaps between locations, all of these different things that I may be, just different headspaces that I am in while creating the project. And I think something else I think about, though, are also the requirements for Wind Waker Unflooded are also, and maybe I've mentioned this before, I don't remember, but just kind of talking about what is Wind Waker Unflooded. I mean, timeline-wise, it is Hyrule right before the Great Flood, but in order to create that, there's different aspects of the project. Like I said, it is both extrapolating from what are these islands of the Great Sea, what would be, let's extend those locations and make them bigger and add more detail to them. Also, let's bring in locations from other games and add those to the world. Let's add new things, under the water. There's just different parts of this project that are all a part of it, that all serve to create a greater Hyrule. And I do get that. I think there's some people in the comments, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I just want to kind of understand some of the different comments I've been getting, and kind of respond to them. I don't know if I could find a specific comment saying this, but But it seems to me um, that there are some people that would rather the project be like the perspective of modeling. How do I put this? Like they want the project to exist as if it was made during the original like development cycle for the Wind Waker. You know, they don't want the project to draw from any games that were released afterward. You know, and like be stricter with the lore. Have it really fit into like here's what the developers would have added if they had more time. And I understand that, and I respect that, and that is kind of a part of this project, right? But it's like overall, it's like I'm also like I want to draw from this is like lore wise, this is Hyrule, um, and Hyrule has been so many things, and it's been so many things. Like Wind Waker came out like Ocarina of Time was the only 3D game that showcased Hyrule before Wind Waker came out, I think. And there have been so many iterations of Hyrule in 3D since, in Twilight Princess, Skyward Sword, Breath of the Wild, you know. And to me, it's like Hyrule is all of those games, and I don't want to limit it to just drawing from Ocarina of Time's locations. It was an extremely limited view of the world in comparison to what we have now. And I love Ocarina of Time. I think it felt huge at the time, and it still feels huge when I go back and play it. But there's locations that it doesn't have. It doesn't have the Bridge of Eldin. You know, it doesn't have the Arbiter's Grounds. Like there's things that it doesn't show. There's towns it doesn't have. It doesn't have Hateno Village. You know, it doesn't have Rito Village. It doesn't have some of these great memorable towns that are now a part of the series, right? I mean there's so many things, especially for Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, that like it showed a fully fledged version of Hyrule that was fully interconnected. Ocarina of Time didn't do that. There are things it didn't show. And if I'm going to create my own interconnected version of Hyrule, I feel like it wouldn't be right to just ignore the most fully fledged version of Hyrule that we've ever seen. I think it makes sense to like draw from all of the games because they are all Hyrule. And this project is like first and foremost, it is, you know, connecting the islands of the Great Sea into the overworld of Hyrule. You know, it is Hyrule before the Great Flood. It is, you know, what would Wind Waker look like below the ocean? That is like the key aspect of this project. But I think like within that prompt is like, well, I think in order to realize Hyrule, I think it makes sense to draw from all of these games. And all these games I feel like are equally Hyrule. I feel like Breath of the Wild's Hyrule is equally Hyrule as much as Twilight Princess's Hyrule is, as much as Ocarina of Time's Hyrule is. You know, I don't want to pick and choose. Excuse me. I don't want to limit myself to what I can choose. You know, I want to be able to draw from all of it because it is all Hyrule. And who's to say that like some of these great locations from Twilight Princess and Breath of the Wild weren't just off screen during the time of Ocarina of Time? You know, maybe during the period of Ocarina of Time there was Hateno Village or the Arbiter's Grounds. We just couldn't see it. It wasn't in frame. It was just off stage. You know? Like, I think that's fine. And I don't know. Like, I say all this just because, like, I get the idea. I've gotten the idea that there's some commenters who are resistant to that. And I totally understand that. And I encourage you to, you know, comment if you still feel like the project doesn't quite feel right to you. I want to hear that criticism. You know, and I want to hear your thoughts, and I take that into consideration. But also sometimes I respond to them and I think, you know what? I think like the way I'm doing it makes sense. And I want the world to be fuller and richer and have more detail and be more meaningful to fans across the series. I know not everyone, there's Breath of the Wild fans that I don't think are interested in Ocarina of Time as much, right? Like that's just part of the Zelda fan base. It's diverse. And like, I do want this to be a project that like, you know, like, I guess like if I'm picking a part of the fan base, it's for Wind Waker fans first. But it's like within that, I want it to be something that the whole Zelda community can kind of cherish and go like, all right, this is the Hyrule that connects these islands of the Great Sea and shows us this, you know, Hyrule in this art style we've never seen before. And it's a Hyrule that we can all connect to. I don't know, like that's something that's important to me. I want it to feel like Hyrule in all of its iterations, and feel true to that. So I don't know, I like that. That's how I feel. And I guess like I invite you, like if you'd rather see like only Wind Waker's Islands of the Great Sea with Ocarina of Time's models between them, retextured. You could do that, and I invite that project, and I'd love to see how that would look. Like I would love to see that. I don't think that's the scope of my project. And I think that's part of my project, but I think that's just like, I want to keep pushing it, and I think it makes sense. But I don't know. I say this all just because I want to respond to feedback, and these are just things I think about as as a creator, and I think about what is the scope of this project, what do I want to add, and but I also invite if you think differently, I do want to hear that. And so I thank you to everyone who's been commenting, and I would I enjoy reading your comments, and I love that so much of the feedback has been extremely positive, and I'm so thankful for that. I'm very I feel very grateful for this comment section and how creative y'all are, and I invite y'all to continue to share your ideas. I will let you know, I think we're going to wrap up the video, so if you want to be able to support me as a creator, I have a Patreon page. I'm a filmmaker and a musician. Any music that you've heard in the background of this video was my music. You can listen to tracks that haven't been officially released on my Patreon. That's a great way to get early access to new music that I compose. If you want to listen to music that's already released, you can support me by listening to my music on Spotify or Apple Music or wherever you listen to music. Type in Joe Kendrick. That's JoeKendrick. I do a lot of soundtrack style stuff. If you like the music of the Legend of Zelda series, you might like the kind of stuff that I do. So I think I'm thankful to everyone who supported me on Patreon or donated through Coffee. All that is incredibly meaningful, and I thank you for that. That helps make possible the creation of everything that I do. But yeah, like I said, for now, without further ado, I'll let you go.